If you missed my video talking about 15 of the most shocking roller coasters I've ridden, go check it out. I'll put a link in the description. This is a sort of sequel to that topic, as I'll be discussing 15 shocking roller coaster moments. So not necessarily rides that surprised me the whole way through, but rides that had a singular element that significantly exceeded expectations. And believe it or not, there's tons of different coaster moments that qualify for this. Usually it's an uncharacteristically intense sensation on an otherwise not so crazy attraction. But it is also possible to have a world-class roller coaster with an element that still far exceeds the rest. Now before we dive in, let me clarify that this list will entirely fluctuate depending on what you are anticipating going into an attraction. A primary example is Vinjas at Phantasialand, and spoiler alerts for the next 10 or so seconds, but I knew that coaster had a tilt track and a bounce track, so that would probably feel strange. Well, they did, and I loved it, but since I already had a basic idea of what to expect, it wasn't enough to crack the top 15. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with number 15, Bolton at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And for this, we're going to be talking about the indoor spaghetti bowl section. This is a series of twists and turns located inside of a building with sporadic themed elements and lighting, but ultimately it was the forces that I was not expecting. It's one of the reasons I love this ride so much, is going in I'm expecting a nice tame family coaster like basically anyone would, but Bolton really is a notch above that. It's genuinely teetering on that thrill level. For me, this causes it to stand out much more than so many other rides of this stature, and I'd say the indoor spaghetti bowl is the most substantial reason why. Number 14, Canyon Blaster at Adventure Dome. This old school aero looping coaster has a gray out moment unlike any other ride I think I've ever been on. To start, you have two forceful loops that on its own would be a pretty awesome moment. But directly after, you are thrown into this tiny speed hill that banks swiftly to the right. What makes it so crazy is your vision is still completely fuzzy at the apex of this hill, so you don't exactly know what's going on as you receive a sharp dose of airtime. The only other moment that reminds me of this sort of is the first hill on Intimidator 305 as you're still recovering from that gray out, but honestly, I think this one comes even more out of nowhere. Number 13, Volcano the Blast Coaster at King's Dominion. I'll never forget the one ride I got on this legendary defunct roller coaster. While there were several highlights of this ride, the one part that stood out the most was that second launch. Because what happens is you're already going super fast as a result of the first launch, but you need a little more speed in order to blast out the top of the volcano. As a result, you speed up even more and it feels unnaturally intense for the few seconds it lasts. I wish there was a way to travel back in time and experience what this launch felt like again, but I'll always be grateful I was able to do it once at all. Number 12, Pantheon at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. Staying in Virginia, Pantheon is a coaster that all around exceeded expectations, yet still there's a clear best part that everyone's been talking about since it opened. It's the airtime hill splitting up the backwards launch. Naturally, because you can't see it coming, the moment of negative g-force completely takes you by surprise, even if it's your second or third ride. And something I just find so underrated about this moment is directly after the hill, there's another little step up that provides yet another quick dose of backwards ejector airtime. It is so out of control and honestly one of the greatest elements Intamin's ever done. Number 11, Bullet at Selva Mágica. Whenever someone hypes up a near-miss element on a coaster, I feel like I'm just not affected by it in the same way. But the one exception from my experience is the near-miss with the station on this one-of-a-kind Schwarzkopf shuttle loop coaster. It's another moment where you're still recovering from some pretty high positive forces, but it's not enough to where you can't see what's coming. It feels like if you stuck your hands up in the air, they would smack right into the station building, and I'd even say this is true for the backwards pass. Even though you don't see it coming, it still shocked me just as much, to be honest. Probably my favorite part of this underrated roller coaster. Number 10, Rutschebanen at Bakken. This is going to be a bit of a weird one. If you've got young kids watching, I'd skip to the next spot. But because this is Denmark, they decided to have riders pass under women's legs, and then you enter a tunnel, so I'm pretty sure the idea here is you're in the woman's vagina. It just feels so random because nothing else around this ride has any inappropriate theming at all. But I was just laughing my head off at this moment. I'd heard about it a long time ago, but I completely forgot it was there going into my ride experience. Number 9, Nighthawk at Carowinds. This is one of the few rides that made it onto both lists of the shocking coasters and the shocking coaster elements, but it's for a great reason. Even if you don't enjoy these Vekoma Flying Dutchman coasters, there's no denying how intense and creative that vertical loop is. What happens is you're flipped onto your back from that prone position and head backwards into this inversion. It is one of the most disorienting things I've ever experienced, but I'll be honest, it's probably one of my favorite inversions ever. The forces are great, but not too much, and the element feels so different from everything else on the ride. A couple days later, I got to do this again on Batwing at Six Flags America, and once again I found it to be awesome, but this was the one I did first, which is why it makes my list. Number 8, Ride to Happiness at Plopsaland Japan. My favorite coaster in the world has many elements where you have absolutely no idea what's happening, but for this list I want to talk about that first launch. Not because it's necessarily one of my favorite parts of the ride, but because it's extremely unique. Right off the bat, there's some nice kick to this acceleration that a lot of coasters by mock rides tend to lack. Then midway down the launch track, a magnet causes your vehicle to rapidly spiral before climbing up the top hat. On my first ride, there were so many elements I couldn't wait to experience, and frankly, both launches, not just this one, didn't stick out. That's why I believe I was so caught off guard by this incredible moment on the ride to happiness. Number 7, Sandy's Blasting Bronco at Nickelodeon Universe. One of the most elusive coaster credits in America, Sandy's has a reputation for being closed more than it's open. However, I've gotten very lucky both visits to the American Dream Mall by getting on all of the coasters here. While there were several parts of this ride that exceeded expectations, none came close to the absolutely outstanding backwards launch. It is by far the quickest acceleration backwards I've ever experienced on a roller coaster, and I believe statistics would back that up. Unlike a Skyrocket 2, I appreciate the lack of a swing launch to build enough speed to make it through the layout. All you have instead are these extremely forceful standalone launches, and this one in particular, in the way it thrusts your body forwards, is truly spectacular. Number 6, Wicked at Lagoon. Another very unique moment of acceleration is the 90-degree vertical launch making up half of the tower element on Wicked. Though you begin accelerating on a flat section of track, it's once you begin climbing straight up when this gets pretty crazy. To this day, I've never felt a sensation like this on a roller coaster, where it feels like you're getting floater airtime on an incline, not to mention a vertical incline. To top it all off, the drop off this top hat is absolutely fantastic as well, making this entire tower my favorite part of any roller coaster at Lagoon. Number 5, Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Florida. Like Rushabenen, this is a rather unique example of a shocking coaster moment. Rather than a particular element, this is a thematic effect that essentially tricks you into thinking the ride's over. After going through the previous layout, riders park on a flat section of track fitted to look like a station, even featuring a control booth and a ride operator. As they're welcoming you back, you notice their voice cut out and a mummy takes her place by shattering the glass and stealing her soul. It was something I didn't realize was going to happen on my first ride, and I was completely blown away because we do not have a moment like this on Revenge of the Mummy back in California. So altogether, I think it was my favorite part of this incredible indoor roller coaster, and that's saying a lot. Number 4, Skyrush at Hershey Park. When I first rode this coaster in 2018, I was lucky to have gone into this ride's first drop not knowing what to expect. This element feels like an actual car crash, and the crazy thing is, it doesn't look like it would feel any different from a normal drop on a roller coaster. What happens is you begin descending already getting some pretty decent floater airtime, but then the track suddenly steepens and your body is thrown forwards into your restraint. It is the most shocking first drop that exists on any coaster, and probably one of the top 3 best in the world. Just an absolutely crazy moment. Number 3, De Schwartes Cannon at Hansa Park. Just a heads up before I reveal what this ride does, it's often a hot topic that you should avoid spoilers before riding this coaster. There are a handful of indoor surprises on this ride, but I think the one that easily took me most by surprise was the drop backwards down the lift hill. I know it's hard to see what's going on because it's so dark in this building, but you are rising up an enormous 200-foot vertical lift hill that stops you at the top. Now I already knew what was going to happen, as I unfortunately couldn't keep myself from learning about this online, but I was still blown away, and I think anyone would be, because this ride drops you all the way down to the bottom and catches you as you're about to level out. I've truly never even heard of another coaster doing this, and it absolutely contributes to the ride being my favorite attraction anywhere in Germany. Number 2, Zippin' Pippen at Bay Beach Amusement Park. For the most part, this is nothing more than a good old classic wooden roller coaster with the occasional floater airtime, but that's about it. Then you reach the second to last hill, and the ride tries to kill you. It's been nicknamed the Ejector Death Hill by enthusiasts, and I'd say that's a pretty accurate representation of how it feels, and even how it sounds. You are chucked upwards, and I mean chucked hard, into your tiny little lap bar. It actually seems like the vehicle derails for a split second, and that was pretty crazy to me. Once again, a moment I was fully aware existed and even anticipated ahead of my first ride, yet it still completely blew away my expectations. Number 1, Air Force One at Fun Spot Atlanta. I already said this was my number 2 most shocking coaster I'd ridden, and that's because I was surprised even before we reached the quad down. It may have been a somewhat predictable top choice, but there's a reason. I've never experienced airtime like this on any other roller coaster in the world. With the exception of maybe the Ejector Death Hill, I think any one of these 4 hills would qualify for the strongest negative G-force I've felt on any ride. But it's the fact that there's 4 of them in a row, and that it's by far the greatest sequence of airtime I've experienced that grants Air Force One the top spot on this list. I can't believe Fun Spot and RMC managed to build something this absolutely insane. Seriously, go ride it if you haven't already. But there you have it, the 15 most shocking coaster moments I've experienced. There's many more that probably could have made this list. I mentioned Vinjas earlier at Phantasialand, but there's also elements like the Mosasaurus roll that are just so outstanding. Most of the rides on this list, though, did something rather unique or unconventional, and those tend to be some of the most memorable parts. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content like this in the future. And also be sure to check out my merch store and second channel Travel Dash in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye, guys.